Hi, I'm Caitlin, and this is Book Chats. Today's Top 5 Wednesday is Top 5 Books We Would Like to See Turned into TV Series. So I'm really excited about this week's Top 5, and I'm probably going to talk longer than I normally do, and I'm just going to let it go because I'm filming this on my birthday, and I feel like birthday girl privilege. I'm going to talk your ears off. This marries my love of books with my love of television, and I just am really excited about this topic. There's some great things to consider when you're considering a television series specifically. In general, translating something from book to a visual medium like film or television means a couple things. One thing that's awesome is that you can choose something that's got a really great story but poor execution. Conversely, though, if you have something that is really good because of the quality of the writing specifically, it's really difficult to translate that because things that are distinct to literature then of course are not part of a different medium. So things specifically to consider when thinking about television as opposed to film are things like television budgets are usually smaller, thinking about networks and what kind of fits in each network's wheelhouse. If you think of a network as an imprint for books, each network has things that they're good at and things they're less good at and things that their specific audiences are going for. Thinking about how you want something that'll last over a series and not just a short 2-3 hour film. So it has to last over time, have a long enough story. And I was thinking of kind of longer form series and things that would go well over multiple seasons. The first thing that came to mind was a lot of fantasy. Unfortunately, there's only a couple channels really doing fantasy well right now, and I'm not sure if those channels would be interested in young adult fantasy and translating that to screen, and that's a lot of the fantasy I read is young adult fantasy. So I ended up actually mostly choosing nonfiction. I chose 3 nonfiction books and 2 fiction books, and those 2 fiction books are actually my 4 and 5. So I'll start at that end, and then I'll go into the nonfiction. I think nonfiction is really ripe for television right now, guys. I've read some great nonfiction books that have really great concepts that could translate so interestingly, guys. Anyway, okay, so I'm going to describe these to you guys. So first is Longbourn, which is a novel by Joe Baker. I'm actually not quite done with it yet. I'm about an hour away from the end on audiobook, and it's fabulous. It's basically set during Pride and Prejudice, but it's from the perspective of the servants at Longbourn. So you get to see everything from the servants' perspective. You get to see what their lives are really like and what's really important in their lives. It's fascinating because it takes this book and this story that you're very familiar with if you've read Pride and Prejudice or consumed Pride and Prejudice, the story in other ways, and kind of pays homage to it and allows you to reference it, but also changes the way you think about some characters. So I am so surprised this hasn't already been made. Of course, it would be a BBC miniseries. There have been so many BBC miniseries about every Austen book ever and other books of that era, and I'm so surprised this one hasn't already become one. I did check on IMDb, and it apparently has been optioned for a film, but I think this would actually definitely be better as a miniseries, not as a film. But if you're that doesn't count, it's totally cheating, I would also totally love to see Boxers and Saints, but I just acknowledge that it's never going to happen, unless maybe, and as an animated, maybe Nickelodeon will pick it up. But I just acknowledge that's not going to happen because, unfortunately, with the way that American television is right now, you can't have a TV show where 95% of the cast has to pass as Chinese. It's just not going to happen. So, but yeah, so Longbourn is my book number 5. That would be a great television show. Book number 4 that would be a great television show is actually a series. The Starbound trilogy, I think, is officially what it's called. And the first book is The Shattered World by Amy Kaufman and Megan Spooner. I think this would be great either on Sci-Fi or the CW. I definitely think you would have to take both of the books and kind of combine them a little bit because This Shattered World, the first book in the trilogy, unless you rely heavily on flashbacks, after the first couple chapters, there are only 2 characters. There are only 2 characters, guys, except for flashbacks. I don't think that would sustain the show, but I think that you could weave in some other things from maybe the second book, introduce some other characters a little sooner, and you could do some heavy flashbacks, a little bit in the style of Arrow, and it would be pretty cool. I think that this is a great story, it's a great world, and there's other things that could happen in that world. There's some freedom that the showrunners could be allowed in what they show and what they do and where they choose to go, so definitely the Starbound trilogy, yeah. Now we're going to enter into my nonfiction, and I'm going to start the nonfiction off with Priceless, which is one of those books that has a great concept and just kind of suffers a little bit in the execution. It is a kind of memoir about the guy who really pioneered the art recovery branch of the FBI. So I think this would be great. If PBS ever decides to make an original drama, they should make this one. There's this butting of heads, because traditionally FBI wants to catch the bad guy, but in this case, catching the bad guy is not as important as getting the artwork back. So there's kind of that element. There's this element of education, because you're learning about these different art, and you're learning about like things like laws that prevent people from selling eagle feathers, and laws about what can and can't be sold where, and it's just pretty interesting. And I think that if PBS decided to make a drama, they could do awesome things with this. So my book number 2, I'm so excited about, guys. How about this show? A man is born to a French nobleman and his black slave on one of France's Caribbean sugar colonies. As a young adult, his father frees him and brings him to France, where he bankrolls his escapades until the father then runs out of money. At that point, this man joins the army, but he eschews his father's name and joins as a lowly entry-level position instead of being an officer. Conveniently, though, for him, that he discarded his father's aristocratic name, because guess what? The French Revolution is happening, and he becomes a revolutionary, and he's a huge, like, revolutionary man, and he stands for all the things that the French Revolution stands for, and equality of man, and he's in the army, he's doing great. He is celebrated. There's a little bit of like testiness when people are like, hey, weren't you in the army before the revolution too? But he like gets through that with flying colors, because he's like, I'm a real revolutionary man and I believe in these ideals. Wins some great battles. He becomes a commander. He does some great things. And he even serves under Napoleon in Egypt. And on the way home from Egypt, he gets shipwrecked and he's imprisoned. Yeah. Super crazy. All these amazing things happen. The French Revolution is part of it. Napoleon gets a cameo. And then, oh, by the way, did I mention that so inspires his young son that later, after his death, that son then goes on to become a famous novelist and fictionalizes his father's experiences and uses it to write classic novels? That's right, we're talking about The Black Count, Glory, Revolution, Betrayal, and the Real Count of Monte Cristo. You guys haven't heard me talk about this book yet because I read it in April, and my April wrap-up hasn't gone up yet, but it is a fascinating story. I did not know this about Alexandre Dumas. In case you're wondering, Alexandre Dumas, the author of The Count of Monte Cristo, this is his father. Alexandre Dumas' father was like a mulatto. He was half black and half white. He went through these interesting time period where the status of people like him, people who were racially either mixed or black, was fluctuating greatly within France because of the revolution. He was this amazing army officer, and then he was basically erased from history because Napoleon didn't want black people in his version of France and in the glory days, kind of. And it's this fascinating book that talks about him and also talks about race relations in France and also talks about this interesting time period, this 10 years of the First French Republic, that I was not very familiar with except on like a surface level and like a Tale of Two Cities level. I think this would make a great television show. What was the channel that made Tudor? Put it on that channel. It has like this army element, it has this history element, it has both the French Revolution and Napoleon, which are both really fascinating parts of history to Americans. Like, we would be interested in that as Americans. It would have this prime role for a man of color as the main character, but he is like interacting within society, so it's not doesn't have the problem that Bacchus and Saints does, where like Hollywood wouldn't make it because there's not enough white people on screen. Like, there's plenty of white people on screen. Don't freak out, Hollywood. I just think it would be such a great show, guys. It would be so cool. But actually, my number one book is one that I could see going in two completely separate directions, and both of them would be awesome, guys. Both of them would be awesome. So it's called The Poisoner's Handbook, something, 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 Jazz Age, New York. I don't know, there's a subtitle. Anyway, basically this book is a nonfiction look at the rise of forensic medicine during the Jazz Age, during Prohibition in New York City. It is so interesting, but it's a little science-y, so the thing that's interesting is you could translate it to a visual medium and kind of drop some of that like heavy science and make it more accessible to people. But it's great. Each chapter deals with a different type of poison and like talks about cases of poisoning and that, but it also talks about like cases through history, like because it's stretching over a time period, a span of time. And there's this thread throughout the book that's about these two guys who really took the coroner's office in New York from like, it's a joke where I like appoint nepotism my nephew and they just do it for the money and they're drunk all the time, to like, you know, CSI, reputable in court, what we believe and know today. Like these guys just like revolutionized the coroner's office in New York City, and like the rest of the country followed their lead, and now we have forensics as a science is legit. And anyway, it's an awesome book, fascinating, and this show could go one of two ways. So there's the kind of like episodic poison cases way that it could go if maybe it was on CBS and it was kind of like CSI vintage. So it would be like, hey, like here's the case of the week, which poison do we think it is? And there's some threads that could run kind of throughout that, but mostly about like the different cases of the week, except instead of in CSI where they like just make them up, it'd be like real cases, guys. Real crazy times cases. Like you do not believe the ways that some people died and were poisoned at the turn of the 20th century. Like, I mean, just after the turn of the 20th century, because this is all happening during Prohibition. By the way, did I mention that it was happening during Prohibition? Because the other way, of course, it could go is if it's on, like, Showtime or HBO or AMC, and it's going to be like this speakeasies, Prohibition, oh my gosh, wasn't it so stupid when we, like, outlawed alcohol and everyone, like, poisoned themselves because we, like, specifically put poison in the alcohol? And the like that would probably then focus on these two guys who are like revolutionizing and they're trying to bring prestige to this position and they're like just focusing on the science and they're trying to get things done. But there's also some like great little characters that could come in. So there's like the episode of the week, kind of poisoning of the week, but there's also a couple poisoners who are like serial poisoners that are talked about. And there's also like this guy who's like, oh, leaded gasoline, not a problem at all. And then like, clearly, guys, we know that leaded gasoline was a problem because that's why we don't have it anymore. Anyway, it's like basically a fascinating book, and I think it'd be even more fascinating show because one of the things is like when I recommend this to people, I'm like, hey, it's a little sciencey at parts. You have to be like okay with that. So I'd recommend it to my friends who like sciencey things, but the show could get rid of some of that. Like it wouldn't have to explain the science behind how your body dies when you eat this poison because like that's not really necessary to the show, and it could still make a great show. And I really want someone to make this show, guys. That's the big problem, is I just want all of these shows to be real shows now. So I'm going to end this now, but I would love to hear what your opinions are. Do you think that the shows I proposed, like, would you watch any of those? And also, what books do you think would be ripe for television? Let me know down below. I would love to hear from you. I will talk to you guys later. Bye! Today's Top 5 Wednesday is Top 5 series endings.